Hi, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from to this new episode of the RiseUp Radio. I'm Ashish Manchanda, the founder of Risely. Risely is an AI co-pilot for leaders and managers, and it helps them to become better at people management on a daily basis. And today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Paul Matthews. Paul, welcome to this episode of the RiseUp Radio.
It's great to be here.
Well, great to have you here. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself with our audience, and then we'll jump into the topic that we have in store for us today?
Oh, sure. Well, we're on the Learning and Development podcast, so I guess I should talk about that sort of stuff. I've been around L&D for over 25 years now. My company actually just hit 25 years this year.
Awesome.
So that's pretty cool. And during that time, I've been involved with learning and development in all sorts of different guises, from delivering training right through to building a software platform, to work on behavior change, and I've written 3 books in learning and development. And so, yeah, been around the block a few times and learned some rather heavy duty lessons along the way, and hopefully some good stuff to share that would be useful to people.
Awesome. I'm sure your experience is going to be really, really rich for the topic that we're going to discuss today. And folks, I think you would have already guessed the theme that we're going to pick today. It's for sure L&D, but it's not what it is today. We're going to talk about what does a future-ready L&D and leadership development look like, right? And that's where Paul and myself, we're going to bring our experience and our insights and thought process in terms of what it could look like, let's say, 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, and maybe 10 years down the line. Right, Paul?
It's a long time. I'm not sure 10 years ago I would have had any inkling of what we're doing today, but
for sure. But yeah, we're the future setters, right? So let's set the right future. Awesome. Cool. So let's jump into it. Paul, 25 years into this company, People Alchemy, and even more than that, running trainings for different folks, right? What is your take on training today? And there is a general perception that the training is boring, right? It's getting boring by the day. And when you think of training, you often think of, large halls, presentations, time off from urgent tasks that you rather be doing rather than, attending this training session. So what's your thought on that?
I think it's interesting, the comments you make, and I think that's global. It's not just, local. I think that's a general perception. Sure. But I think what we've got to do is, this session refers to future ready L&D. So what we should be thinking about is not so much what's wrong or right about training now, but how should it be evolving so it's fit for the future. You talked about 2, 5, 10 years in the future. What's training going to look like in the future? I mean, the first question is does it need to evolve at all? And I think the answer is probably yes. Your comments suggest that there's something not quite right there. And we've all experienced training that's kind of pointless from our perspective, that didn't change us, didn't change what we did. And we've also, many of us experienced some great training from time to time as well. Correct. So Correct. We shouldn't tar it all with the same brush, as it were.
Agreed.
But of course, the question that brings up is, evolve into what? If it needs to evolve, and I think we're agreed it does need to evolve into what? And it has been evolving. It isn't the same now as what it was 10, 20 years ago. I remember putting acetates on overhead projectors, with big, hundreds of them, and it's just scary.
Right.
And I used to do too in the training room a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I tend to back off training a little bit. I tend to look at the wider picture in terms of what's the purpose of training, and then indeed how we even define training, because there's a lot of people will define it quite differently.
Correct.
So I look at L&D really should be providing interventions and experiences to people that will enable them to better execute the organizational strategy of the organization they're within. To get people doing things differently, to get them doing different things in service of that strategy, of enabling them and enhancing their delivery of it. So if we think about it that way, And then you've got to say, well, within those interventions and experiences that L&D is delivering, training may well be a part of that.
Correct.
But in and of itself, it's proven inadequate to do the job that I think often people try and make it do.
Yeah.
There's more required around, above, before, after it in order to make it work. And also, I think it's often used where it's inappropriate. So perhaps training was never the right answer for that particular presenting problem in the first place. So we have to be, and then of course it's bound to fail. So then people blame the training, whereas maybe it wasn't the training. It was the blame should rest with whoever decided training was a solution to that problem.
But this particular training was the solution to that problem, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but whatever happens, if training is involved, then it's got to provide some benefits as part of a number of things that need to happen for that intervention, for that solution.
Yeah.
Because in and of itself, training seldom provides the behavioral change that we're typically looking for, because that's really what we're after. So there's always going to be something else required wrapped around training, if it's used at all, in order to encourage learning transfer and to get people operationalizing what was delivered in the training. So it's part of that bigger design thing. So I think it needs to be looked at as in a more holistic way across that whole process, rather than just saying, what can we do about training in an individual thing? What do you think? Does that kind of resonate with?
Totally. I think what you mentioned is absolutely right. It's what we have today is not wrong, right? But it's for sure inadequate in order to be able to make sure that learning translating into behaviors or not, right? And definitely when you look at it from that lens, it definitely feels that, something is amiss, right? And that's where, organizations feel that, hey, we are investing so much into our training and learning programs, but the ROI isn't coming in, right? The performance isn't changing, or let's say, the turnover isn't going down. Then what is it, right? Where are the dollars going, and are we making the right investments or not? And I totally agree with you that it starts right from the start, which is strategizing, deciding what training to whom, and then execution to the end. Totally right. But more
it's that.
Yeah,
I was just saying, it's the right training in the right place to the right people with the right content at the right time in the right way, and so on. All of those different factors need to be brought to bear, otherwise it's going to fail.
Correct. And if you look at it, right, there are few external dynamics that are also changing, that are making the current modes of learning, I would say not only training, but the current modes of learning inadequate for people to absorb the overall learning, right? If you see the current workplace, there's so many transitions that have happened, or so many transformations that have happened in the last 4-5 years with COVID coming in. And not only before, with COVID coming in, but even before that, right? You have multi-generations working together in a workplace who have different preferences, who have different working styles. You have generations who, like you said, you put acetate sheets on top of a projector. And then you have generations who basically were born and grew up in the Google era, right? In the social media and the digital era, right? The attention spans of learners is totally different. Right, it's changing rapidly. We're living in a world of 1-minute short videos, 2-minute short videos, and people don't have attention spans which are, there to be able to sit 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. Forget multi-day training sessions, that were conceptualized earlier, right? And on top of that, you have, the famous Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. You forget what you learned in a month's time. At least 90% of what you learned, you basically end up forgetting. That's where I think the current modes are inadequate for me, if you were to nail it down.
Well, I mean, this is what I talked about learning transfer, is that a training program without a learning transfer wrapper wrapped around it in some way, and there's lots of ways of doing that. Heck, I wrote a book on it. So there's a lot of a training program without learning transfer kind of baked into it as part of the methodology of delivery is going to have very little effect. It's going to have very little impact. It's going to have people won't change much. The stats show that maybe 1 in 6 people, these are stats from Professor Brinkerhoff, for example, in the research he's done, and there's lots more besides that. Roughly 1 in 6 people will pick up the ball and run with it. 2 or 3 of those 6 people will do a little bit and then probably slide back to their previous behaviors. And then another couple out of those 6 just won't do anything at all after they leave the training room. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. There's all sorts of ways to fix that, which we don't really have time for.
Let's talk about some of these ways, Paul. Let's talk about some of these ways. What do you think is the right way for the transference to happen so that learning is more sticky, or it becomes habitual rather than incidental the way it is at the moment?
I think your word habitual is a good one. It's effectively what we need to be looking for is people that start behaving differently. They start doing different things and doing things differently, which is a lovely little line from Robin Hoyle, who first told me that sort of definition of learning. And then that's sustainable over time. And that's that habitual thing you just mentioned, is creating habits within people to the effect that that's just how they do things, and they will almost forget how they used to do things. And habits are only ever going to be formed through repetition. That's kind of one of the definitions of a habit. You need to lay in the new neural pathways that will then trigger that habit whenever certain events happen. And that's part of this learning transfer. So repetition, practice, experimentation, and so on is all part of it. Some of the research I back into there is stuff done by Dr. Ina Weinberg-Heidel in Austria, who did a PhD on getting effect and impact out of training. And she came up with a 12 levers model, which is in one of my books with her permission. We've spoken at conferences together and done quite a bit of work. And I love her model because it's fairly straightforward, and it talks about 12 levers of learning transfer. These are the 12 levers you've got to pull. And so she cut all that research down. By the way, that research in learning transfer has been going on for over 100 years. And it's actually amazing how little of that has worked its way into the day-to-day operations of people delivering and working with training. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. But she's distilled all that down and come up with these 12 practical levers that you can focus on. 3 of them are to do with the mindset of the individual. And so that's sort of, motivation and what's called volition, which is their sense of perseverance with it. And also self-efficacy. Do I think I can even do this? If I don't think I can, I probably won't start. And then there's 4 factors that are related to the design of the training. And for example, one of those is that there is a pathway, there's a journey, there's a sense of a sequence of steps. It's a bit like the sat nav, when you've got a clear blue line on the Google Maps, you sort of breathe a sigh of relief in saying, well, somebody knows where I'm going, and they're going to give me some steps to get there. And provided I follow the steps, I'm going to get there. And that's what's interesting about training as well, is there's a very similar set of critical success factors to training to using a sat nav. And you've got to know where you are now. You've got to know where you want to get to. And from a training perspective, this should be in behavioral terms. What's our current behavioral location? What's our future behavioral destination? What are the steps that someone needs to take, turn-by-turn instructions to get from where they are now to where they want to be? And then how do we hold them accountable for following the steps? That's the 4th factor. You got to follow the steps or you're not going to get there. And then there's some other stuff in the 12 levers. There's the culture of the organization that's there. There's support from manager. And so on. So that's a really great model. And there's some ebooks on my website that include it, so people can grab those for free. So that's all readily available for download. So you ask, how do you change training? I think applying those 12 levers is a really good place to start. And thinking, as I'm designing my training, how do I also figure out how to pull each of those levers? And that's not always just the person delivering the training. Although
that is an organizational change. That is an organizational change, right? It starts.
Some of it has to be, yes, because the change that's taking place as a result of the training, hopefully the change that's taking place is taking place within the context of the organization, which will have a culture, a way of doing things. And there will be resistance to change from within that culture, because that's what cultures do, is they have a level of inertia that needs to be overcome in order to apply change to that. And again, so that's about culture change. And again, there's levers you can bring to bear on that. We don't have the days required to talk that one through either, but that's all part of the thinking that needs to go into the design of a program that will have an impact.
Interesting. So, Paul, what's the thesis behind the changing L&D landscape today, right? And you interact with a lot of L&D professionals. More importantly, what's their take? And especially with AI coming in, how are they perceiving AI, and how are you also perceiving AI in the L&D space?
It's a really interesting one right now. We're right at the beginning of stumbling around in the dark almost with it, although it's amazing what it can do already. I find it interesting, and I kind of liken it sometimes to when you had this richness of the old stage shows back in the day, way back, and you could attend a theater and you'd have everything there. And then they started creating these little rinky-dink black and white movies with piano in the background, subtitles and jerky, and that was a movie. And you sort of think, well, how could that ever work? And you look at a movie today, it's become a very sophisticated vehicle to present stories and things. So AI
even shot on mobile phones. And even shot on mobile phones, right?
Exactly. But the thing is the evolution of a movie from that initial black and white silent movie with subtitles through to what's possible today. That's happening with AI and happening way quicker than it's ever happened to the movies. So within a few years, we will have some incredibly sophisticated AI available. And I think also what's happening is, at the moment, there's all this idea of you must learn how to prompt AI and so on, which is great. But within a year, even less, there's more and more available where you don't have to prompt it. It'll be like having a conversation, because people are building AIs to sit between you and the AI, so that you can interact with it in a much more human fashion. So I think that's coming. So there's some, I think it's going to be easy to use. It's going to start just becoming embedded in so many of the things that we're already using. And that's happening already, as we know. It's been happening for years, sort of undetected. It's now more visible. There is also, of course, some downsides to such a powerful tool. One of the ones that scares me a little bit is the fact that it's eating its own breakfast. That AI is being trained on what's on the web, and so much of what's on the web is now starting to be AI generated. And they've actually done these generational fast track to this, and found that after 5 or 6 cycles of an AI eating its own breakfast, as it were, it actually starts producing garbage. So I think what's going to happen, there will be a lot more specialization in AI. There'll be a lot better control over the data that's being used to train these large language models, particularly. And rather than just generic stuff off the web, it'll be some specific things that are there. I'm thinking of putting all the writing I've done, which is a huge amount, into a chat box to make it more readily available to people who just want to interact with the stuff I've done. I haven't got there yet, but I'm working on that as an idea. So I think there's a lot of different things that can happen. There's some really interesting research done by Dr. Philippa Hardman on how AI can be used in a learning and development environment, in terms of design, in terms of, and she's saying, yeah, you can use it to help produce content, but that's not really where the big fish are. I mean,
that's a low-hanging fruit, basically, just like producing content for the web as well, right?
So I think watch this space. I don't like to predict what's going to be there, and of course, hell, for all we know, in a year's time, it's going to become aware and sentient and take over the world. But hey, you didn't
that's a
hear that from
doomsday.
me.
Right. And what is the industry saying about it? I mean, the L&D professionals, do you think, are they open to exploring AI? How
Very
keen
much
are
so.
they?
Yeah. There's I saw an article just the other day about Arizona State University, which is recognized as one of the most progressive universities. And I know one of the professors there in charge of innovation. I met him at a conference we were both speaking at last year. And fascinating what they're doing. But they went out to everybody in the university and said, give us some ideas on how to use AI in the context of education. And they got 400 submissions back, different submissions from different people.
Right.
They have 200 of those now in active projects.
Yeah.
And they put that request out for submissions at the beginning of this year. And now they've got 200 active projects on using AI in different ways for different aspects of education, both in the university and out to the general public.
Yeah.
So there's some really innovative, big time work going on. I think at an organizational level, I've spoken with different organizations where the heads of L&D, some of them are still, I would say, confused in terms of, what it is and how to use it. Others are getting their teams to experiment with it. Some are working with Dr. Philippa Hardman, for example, on some quite big projects. So it's really interesting, the range of attitude. And some of them are just sitting back saying, well, it's not ready yet. We'll climb on board when there's some people out there selling stuff. So you've got your early adopters. So it's your typical product curve. You've got your early adopters. You've got some who are hanging back saying, we'll climb on board when it's good and ready, and in the moment we'll just keep doing what we're doing. Certainly from an L&D perspective, I think in operations there's other stuff going on, in terms of replacing call center staff and stuff like that.
For sure.
But that's a different deal.
Right. Yeah, and I think when you look at leadership development primarily, right, and that's the area that we are diving deep into. I think it's a blank canvas if you look at it, right? And if you look at the current landscape of leadership development, the current modes are largely manual. The more effective modes, I would say, right? You have one-on-one coaching, which is a very manual process, right? You have training programs, which are also manual. I mean, now there is some AI coming in from content generation point of view, but again, that is another low-hanging fruit at the end, right? If you look at the tech penetration in the entire leadership development space, that has been very low, compared to some of the other sub areas in the HR spectrum or other functions like sales and marketing, right? And in my opinion, I think leadership development is really, really ripe for an AI revolution. And we're just at the starting point of it, like you said. The buffet is yet to come. And I think it's gonna contain a lot of delicious stuff. For example, deciding who should get what training at what time and when, right? I think that's something that more and more, I think systems are gonna do much better job than what humans are doing today. I think preparing a blueprint of that strategy in terms of what should be executed and who needs what support. I think that's primarily where a lot of change is going to happen for me. And if you look at it, right, the basically 4 pillars that I think with which the leadership development space is going to move. Primarily, maybe the entire L&D space might move in that respect. And that, again, goes back to the drivers that you're currently looking at, right, which is the generational shift, which is the, short attention spans, spread out workforce, remote and gig workforce, people are not working from the same locations, etc., right? So there's going to be a very high push from a user side rather than from an implementer side to have hyper-personalized content, which is content for you the same as content for me, right? If it is the same, then it's not going to be valuable for me because your context might be different and my context might be different. Your challenges that you're facing might be different and my challenges might be different, right? But can you hyper-personalize the learning to my context and my problems and my issues and my challenges. I think that's going to be one of the biggest drivers in terms of adoption and ROI when it comes to success of the leadership development programs and maybe the overarching L&D programs as well, right? I think the second biggest driver in terms of the solutions is going to be in the flow of work, which is, am I going out for 2 days or am I taking out 4 hours to take a training session, or am I learning small bits on a daily basis, right? And when I need it, which is when I'm working with my team, I'm talking to a team member, I'm facing a challenge, and pop comes a solution to me, right? Which is how to best handle this situation with a team member, right? If that in the flow, training happens, then it becomes even more effective and habitual, which is, creating those habits like we discussed. And the third pillar for me is actually on demand. I need support when I need it rather than, somebody else in the organization deciding when do I need that support, right? Which is, can I take control of my learning rather than somebody pushing that learning content to me? And I think the fourth pillar is more around, is the content solution oriented and action oriented or not, right? Or is it, same knowledge that it's being imparted to 50 people or 100 people? Is it going to solve my problems the way I'm facing them right now? Can I implement them right away or not, right? I think for me, these are the four pillars with which the future is going to change a bit in terms of, I don't know exactly, like you said, we don't have that crystal ball, what it's going to look 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line. But I think these are the major dimensions with which it's going to evolve primarily.
I think it's interesting what you're talking about resonates very closely to the work that Gloria Geary did in the 80s. So she was well ahead of her time, and she talked about an EPSS, electronic performance support system. But unfortunately, in the 80s, the technology just wasn't really quite there to enable that, her vision to take place. And she was very much of the opinion that where possible, it is better to actually support people in the flow of work.
Yeah.
And to do that with some electronic system that didn't mean they had to disturb a colleague or leave their flow of work. So this does work with the stuff you're talking about. One thing you mentioned there, which was interesting, you talked about short attention spans. And I think, yes, in some ways that's true, but people have long attention spans if they are looking at the latest Avatar movie or something. That's 3 hours. So there is not a lack of attention span. This isn't some kind of deficit we've suddenly ended up with as a species. It's what we're being asked to pay attention to that matters.
Correct.
And I think it's really important that rather than blame attention span, we actually say we need to blame us because we're giving them stuff that really doesn't grab their attention.
Yeah, we're not producing enough better content which is grabbing their attention, basically.
Yeah. So, and part of that, of course, is relevance, which is, again, what you talked about is what's relevant to me in my context at the moment, at this point of time, right where I am at the point of work.
Correct.
And one of the models I created a while back in terms of performance was people need to be capable at the point of work.
That's true.
And that capability at the point of work arises from them knowing certain things and being ready to perform at that point when they're asked to do so, but also that the environment that surrounds them is also ready to perform that point. In other words, the environment is capable as well as the individual, and those two things need to come together at the point of work at that particular time, and then someone is capable of doing what they need to do, and then they will do it, and therefore performance will occur as, desired performance. So I think it's that point of work that's the critical one. What can we provide people at that point of work that will assist them to do what they need to do?
Yeah.
Now, clearly you don't want your airline pilot or your surgeon deciding, oh, I need to cut with a scalpel now. I will now look up something.
Let me learn how to do that.
Yeah. So there's certainly a lot of stuff that we cannot train at the point of work, at the point of demand, but there is a lot that we can.
Right.
And there's also a lot that we can use as aid memoirs, where we've taught people, okay, this is the kind of, one of the things I talk about often is if you're doing a training course, just stop and think, after that training course, what support materials would or should people have with all of that information to enable them at the point of work to look at it. And very often for a training course, I say to people, don't build a training manual that's used once in the course, and then build the support materials, and then on the training course, teach them how to use the support material
so that they can actually use that later on.
Yeah. And actually, when you're building support materials, you need to build them in a way that gives them quick access to it's the 80-20 rule. There's 80% of things that are going to occur. There's only a small amount of information they need. So it's almost like a pyramid. Start at the top. What's the most common question? If that's not answered, go to the next level with a bit more information and so on. And the bottom layer of the pyramid, and this sort of comes from Gloria Gary's work again, is go talk to a colleague, but don't disturb a colleague till you've exhausted all the technical possibilities where you can self-serve and do what you need to do. So I think there's pros and cons for all of that. But certainly what you're talking about there to me is that electronic performance support at the point of work.
We're basically learning from history.
That's what AI
actually, yes, absolutely. Now the technology exists for us to be able to do that, right? We're basically working in a connected environment where we are always connected, right? You always have somebody sitting on a shoulder and trying to tell you something. Hey, Ashish, you're not doing this correctly. You should be doing this, right? And that's primarily what you need, right? Which is somebody hand-holding you at the time when you need to be handheld in a way.
Yeah, I think I'd prefer to ask them to, rather than have them monitoring me and watching over me like Big Brother saying, naughty boy, you did that wrong, But having said that, that might well occur. I can imagine if we had a bigger meeting with 5 people here on this Zoom call, there could be an AI involved who has the job to say, come on, guys, you're getting off topic here. We need to be focusing on X.
It's got to happen, Paul. And I think that's where, the productivity angles and the overall assessment angles are going to change as well, right? Is the employee, for example, let's say you have a person on the line fixing nuts and bolts, right? Are they fixing properly or not, right? If somebody can just watch and tell them that, hey, you didn't fix that one correctly without human intervention, that's basically, you're avoiding a disaster to happen.
That's actually already happening, that sort of stuff. There are, some of the car manufacturers are doing that. For example, I know BMW's got some augmented reality stuff where they have the mechanics wearing headsets where they're augmenting what they can see. And the little arrow says, this nut comes next, and you need a 10mm spanner for it to remove the air filter. And it just guides them through, but clearly also is able to say, hang on, you just did the wrong thing there because it's not looking like it's supposed to look.
True. That's true. Well, awesome. Well, that's primarily, what we see as the future of L&D. Do you have any parting thoughts for us regarding the overall L&D umbrella, Paul? If you had a crystal ball, what are you going to predict?
I think it's really a mindset thing that L&D needs to become much more clear about what its purpose is. And I think too many times L&D they think their purpose is to provide training on request from managers who are using training as a panacea for their existing problem du jour, whatever the heck that is. And it's therefore not having much impact. So I think L&D needs to get far more strategically involved with development and executing organizational strategy and looking at both the present and the future in terms of what people need to bring to the point of work in order to be capable at that point of work. How do we get people ready and prepared to be able to contribute effectively at the point of work to do the tasks they're being asked to do, that they're delegated? I don't think L&D is there yet in most places. It's not thinking that way. So it needs to be thinking about how do they get performance at that point of work. And of course, there's lots of ways to do that. One is to provide support at the point of work. One is to train them before they get there for the stuff they've got to know, like which direction which end to hold the scalpel, for example, and so on. So I think it's really a mindset issue and getting a lot more clarity about that whole process of when management asks for some development or training. how to have that conversation and through to the point where there's an intervention, if it's even needed, but also how to be proactive and be some of the first in the line when there are changes mooted within the company, that L&D is involved very early in that process rather than at the very end. So I think it's a mindset thing about L&D, personally. And I think there's lots of things.
I can't agree more with you, Paul. I can't totally agree more with you. That's you've hit it on the head. Awesome. So we are coming towards the end of our session today, Paul. Thank you so much. And there you have it, folks.
Good chat.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. For me, it was lovely.
Oh, yeah. But if anybody has questions for me or wants to get in touch, I'm sure you'll put details in.
Yes, absolutely. We'll put the details in the comments, and they can reach out to us. So folks, feel free to reach out to Paul or myself. If you have any questions about L&D or leadership development, we'll be happy to help you through it. And Paul, what do you say? Let's connect in 5 years and see if our predictions.
That would be interesting. That would be interesting.
In
fact, if anybody send me a comment on LinkedIn, just find me there and send me, what do you think is going to happen in 5 years? I'd be really intrigued to see what people think, but I'm certainly not going to say anything. I mean, heck, these people that say what's happening in the next 12 months, at the beginning of every year, do that, and they inevitably get it wrong. So, hey.
Totally. Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for joining in. Hope you enjoyed the session as much as we did presenting it to you today. Thank you, and you take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for inviting me on. Bye for now.
Bye.